Never before have the Chinese people faced a terror as ruthless and evil as Mao's Communist Party. Just like Marx, Lenin, and the deep state, Mao knew that what religions taught was real, and that Satan is also very real. Mao sought to destroy the will of the Chinese people to the point where he believed no divine being would ever come to their aid. Through the Cultural Revolution, the Chinese Communist Party ruined a 5,000-year-old civilization in 10 years. So, how was Mao able to create the most destructive regime in human history? Let's find out. Communism in China, on the edge of wonder. But be warned, this series may not be for the faint of heart.
Hello, and welcome to our final episode in this series of exposing communism on Edge of Wonder.
We felt that there's a lot of misunderstandings about what communism really is and wanted to expose it and how it has been the most destructive force in our world.
In this episode, we're going to talk about the rise of the Chinese Communist Party and how it has killed more people than any regime in history. We have to warn you, there are some extremely graphic details in this episode, but we feel it's necessary to tell this to show how evil the Communist Party has really been in history.
So parents, you might not want your kiddos to watch this one. Let's begin with China's history. China has one of the most rich and oldest cultures in this period of our civilization. With over 5,000 years history, the Chinese people have shaped so many aspects of our ways of life.
Throughout all these years, many dynasties came and went, with the cultural landscape drastically changing with each emperor. Some were very noble and upright, and some brought destruction to their people.
However, no matter how bad the worst emperors were, they all still believed in the divine, just their understanding may have been skewed. Even Genghis Khan never considered himself to be a ruthless barbarian. He even said,
"I am the punishment of God. If you had not committed great sins, God would not have sent a punishment like me upon you."
So why are we bringing this up? Just to note that most of the Chinese wars throughout history were fought over land, religious beliefs, or control over a population. However, once an emperor gained control, he would have those people be a part of everyday society, just under a new emperor, and life would continue on.
Never before have the Chinese people ever faced a terror as ruthless and evil as Mao's Communist Party. Even the name of Chinese Communist Party in Chinese has satanic roots. The traditional character Dang means party or gang, consists of two radicals which correspond to the words promote and dark.
So when you combine these two radicals together, it literally translates to promoting darkness. Even Confucius said,
"People who help one another conceal their wrongdoings are said to be forming a gang."
Or it could also be translated as a cabal.
The goal of communism is to destroy belief in any kind of faith. Thus, without faith, the people would then turn to its ruling party as their new god.
So how did China go from being the most deeply spiritual-rooted country to becoming the most atheistic and communist countries ever?
Well, everyone, that is exactly what this episode is about. The rise of the Chinese Communist Party. Most historians think China's contemporary era started around the mid-1800s, which was during the Qing dynasty. China soon started to go through a westernization movement where they opened up trade with the West for goods and weapons.
But internally, China started facing tremendous and painful turmoils. Many of the intellectuals got together to come up with ways of saving the country and its people. But with another war on the verge of breaking out with Japan, and other national issues, their ideas only became disappointments, leading to despair.
As stated in the Epoch Times 9 commentaries on the Communist Party,
Like people who turned to any available doctor in times of illness, they looked outside China for a solution. When the British and French styles failed, they switched to the Russian method. They did not hesitate to prescribe the most extreme remedy for the illness, in the hope that China would quickly become strong.
Their remedy, communism. They wanted to take the easy way out and thought that this ideology would free them of their burdens. Unfortunately, they couldn't have been more wrong.
Now, before we get into what happened, let's bring up one of the most ruthless leaders in pretty much the history of our current civilization, Mao Zedong. You might be batting an eye when we say that, but after this episode, you will be agreeing with us for sure.
In 1911, the Xinhua Revolution began against the Qing dynasty, and 17-year-old Mao decided to join the Revolutionary Army and the Kuomintang, or the KMT for short, which is the Chinese Nationalist Party, and who formed the First Republic of China.
According to Fritz Springmeier, author of The Bloodlines of the Illuminati, Mao had wanted to go to a Christian missionary school, but they rudely threw him out because he was Chinese. Fritz said he never forgot this and vowed to get his revenge on Christianity and on God.
So we don't know for certain if this is true, but either way, it makes perfect sense why Mao turned to Leninist and Marxist ideology after the Soviet Revolution in 1919 and started to get members in the KMT to join his Chinese Communist Party.
Mao believed that China had too many people and the country was using too much resources, land, and food for the Chinese people and wished to eliminate anyone who wouldn't go along with his bidding.
Recycling that old eugenics theory, I guess. How original. He already started to form his plan, which was destroying the four olds. He felt that these would stand in his way, which for his so-called communist utopia, and these were old customs, old culture, old habits, and old ideas.
In reality, he wanted to destroy traditional culture so Chinese people would forget their roots. Then it would be easier for them to accept his new communist ideology and its propaganda, such as, without the CCP, there would be no new China.
As for the four olds, for example, the old habits would be referring to our faith in the divine or belief in religion. If he destroyed this, then his new Communist Party would become the new God for the Chinese people, and they can force people to worship it.
The old ideas would be thoughts and ideas of ancient scholars that helped shape China to which it became before the party took over, and how almost everyone believed in virtue and karma.
Old customs would actually break up the family and then install its own ideology and propaganda into the next generation of children.
Old culture was actually referring to the Chinese language itself. Every single Chinese character has meaning behind it. For example, the traditional character for dragon, or long, is actually in the shape of a dragon, which happens to be on my shirt.
Oh. However, now the simplified character removed the dragon and now the original meaning is lost. There's so many more examples of this.
The traditional character for love has the character for heart inside of it. This meant that people love you for your actions. However, the CCP removed the heart from the character, which it now loses its original nature. They basically cut the heart out of it. The sad part is, now the inner meanings behind the traditional characters have been completely lost to the modern-day Chinese people, especially the younger generation.
Mao wanted to destroy traditional values, so the CCP decided to simplify their own language in order for people to forget their roots and their culture and where they came from.
So how is Mao able to create the most destructive regime in human history? Just like a snake sneaking up on its prey waiting to strike, Mao was waiting for the right opportunity to arise.
It was also during this time that Lenin and Stalin realized that the US would become a threat to them. So in order to combat this, they needed China on their side. So the Bolsheviks sent their representatives to China to start setting up communist organizations, and soon an alliance was formed with the KMT.
Over the next 30 years, the CCP actually became an organ of the Communist Party of the Soviet Union. And Mao was receiving a monthly stipend, about 170 yuan, from the Russians.
Now, that may not seem like much in today's world, but back then, the average monthly salary of a worker in Shanghai at that time was around 20 yuan.
Because of these meetings, Mao's Communist Party was able to experience very rapid growth, but still wouldn't be able to overthrow the KMT. So Mao decided he would support both sides, but secretly was trying to take down the KMT from within.
Soon a civil war broke out between the two sides, and Mao suffered a heavy defeat at the hands of the KMT. His Communist Party was on the verge of collapse. Then, out of fear, it loudly proclaimed that, quote, Chinese do not fight Chinese, and promised to submit itself to the leadership of the KMT.
Secretly, Mao was waiting for the right opportunity to destroy the KMT, and he didn't care who he killed to win, or with what methods he used for that victory.
It was basically like a warped version of the art of war.
Yeah.
When World War II broke out and China was at war with Japan, Mao took full advantage of the situation and concocted a plan so evil that would guarantee his victory over the KMT.
Mao knew that if he had his troops fight the Japanese, he would lose. But if he joined forces with the KMT against the Japanese, the KMT would come out as the victors, and he wouldn't be able to take over China. So what did he do? He had his troops fight alongside with the Japanese against the KMT.
To quote the 9 commentaries again here,
the CCP exhorted people in the KMT-controlled areas to rebel, calling on workers to strike, peasants to make trouble, students to boycott classes, poor people to quit working, soldiers to revolt, so as to overthrow the nationalist government.
In this way, they were calling out all of the KMT supporters to come and take a stand against the Japanese. But really, the CCP was actually calling them to their death so Mao could make sure there would be no uprising from any KMT supporters.
While the battle was going on, Mao started to expand his own base. Once the KMT were on the verge of defeat, Mao then had his troops turn against the Japanese forces, and the Japanese started to surrender, and then they incorporated them into the CCP's army.
For the regular citizens of China, Mao was now a hero, and he had single-handedly won the war and formed a massive army in the process and showed that his new Communist Party would lead the new China. And you can even see this in modern Chinese movies today, where Japanese are considered to be evil.
Even today, the textbooks in China, which were produced by the CCP, say that the KMT ran away from the Japanese and it was the CCP who saved China.
Mao quickly realized that the best way to kill off a large number of Chinese people was not through war, but through famines.
As bad as Stalin's famine was, it was nothing compared to how many people died during the CCP's. In just 3 years, an estimated 40 million people died, but the real number is impossible to trace.
The CCP labeled the Great Famine as the 3-year natural disaster, meaning they're saying that a natural disaster caused the deaths of the people, and this is what is still written in their textbooks.
In some of the most serious deprived areas, families would exchange one another's children to eat since there wasn't any food. Writer Sha Qing shared a story about a peasant farmer who was only left with his son and daughter.
One day, the father told the girl to leave the house, and when she came back, she couldn't find her brother, but instead saw oil floating in a cauldron and a pile of bones next to the stove. The next day, the father added more water and asked his daughter to come closer.
The terrified girl cried to her father,
"Daddy, please don't eat me. I can collect firewood and cook food for you. If you eat me, nobody else will do this for you."
This was just one case, and we are sure that there were many unheard stories like this.
Guys, I wish we could say we're making this up, but this is actually the reality in China's communism. Mao was also testing party officials during this time, and any official who resisted telling the truth to people and denied that any famine was going on was promoted among party members to the top ranks.
One thing that the CCP did was to force the Chinese people to turn against each other and not to trust each other and call out anyone who would oppose the CCP.
Children would be rewarded for these so-called good deeds and would receive high marks in their classrooms. And family members turning in other family members would actually rise in the ranks of the Communist Party.
In the 9 commentaries of the Communist Party, there is a story of a school teacher in Beijing in the 1960s who accidentally put 2 characters of socialism and fall down next to each other when she was quizzing her students on Chinese characters.
Her students reported her to members of the Communist Party, and she started to be criticized every day and beaten by the male students. This is a teacher. Her daughter even severed her relationship with her, and the only work she was allowed to continue on with was cleaning the toilets and the restrooms in the school.
During the Cultural Revolution, it was common that fathers and sons would torture each other. Husbands and wives struggled with each other, mothers and daughters reported on each other, and students and teachers treated each other as enemies.
Party nature motivated the conflicts and hatred in these cases. During the early period of the CCP rule, many high-ranking CCP officials were helpless as their family members were labeled as class enemies. This, again, was driven by party nature.
Now that Mao had formed his Chinese Communist Party, he wanted to control and take over everything. China had more people than any country in the world. If people started their own revolution, they could overthrow it.
He needed to make the Chinese so submissive of the party that they would even be scared to even think bad thoughts about it.
This next story is one that's really hard to tell. It's about Lenin, the daughter of Zhang Zhixin, a dissident during the Cultural Revolution who became famous for criticizing the idolizing of Mao. She was arrested and labeled as a counter-revolutionary who refused to reform. A person from the court said to Lenin that her mother was going to be executed and asked her how she felt about it.
Lenin wrote later,
I was astonished. I did not know how to answer. My heart was broken, but I pretended to be calm, trying hard to keep my tears from falling. My father had told me that we could not cry in front of others, otherwise we had no way to renounce our relationship with my mother. Father answered for me, if this is the case, the government is free to do what it deems necessary.
The person then asked the family if they would collect her body if she is executed. Her father said that they don't need anything. She then described that they staggered along as they walked home in a howling snowstorm.
Lenin then writes,
We did not cook. Father split the only coarse corn bun we had at home and gave it to my brother and me. He said, finish it and go to bed early. I lay on the clay bed quietly. Father sat on a stool and stared at the light in a daze. After a while, he looked at the bed and thought we were all asleep. He stood up, gently opened the suitcase we brought from our old home in Shenyang, and took out Mother's photo. He looked at it and could not hold back his tears. I got up from bed, put my head into Father's arms, and started crying loudly. Father patted me and said, Don't do that, we cannot let the neighbors hear it. My brother woke up after hearing me cry. Father held my brother and me tightly in his arms. This night, we did not know how many tears we shed, but we could not cry freely.
This story just destroys me every time I read it. In the book, Enemy Within by Father Raymond J. de Jager, he told stories of how the CCP used violence to terrify people into submission. He gives an example that the CCP invited everyone, especially children, with their teachers from local schools to all come to the square in a village. They then brought out 13 patriotic young men who were against what the CCP was doing.
Someone then announced their so-called wrongdoings as an executioner came out on stage holding a sharp knife. The horrified teachers would then be forced to lead the students into singing CCP songs with lyrics praising the party and giving it the highest glory.
As the children sang, the executioner would stand behind each so-called criminal and cut the heads off one by one. De Jager writes,
Blood sprayed out like a fountain as the head rolled on the ground. The children's hysterical singing turned into chaotic screaming and crying. The teacher kept the beat, trying to keep the songs going. Her bell was heard ringing over and over in the chaos.
He goes on to write,
Communist soldiers came over, cut the victims' chests open, and took out their hearts for a feast. All the brutality was done in front of the children. The children went all pale due to the terror, and some started throwing up. The teachers scolded the soldiers and lined the children up to return to school.
The Communist Party would do this as many times as they could, and Father de Jager saw this happen multiple times. He then said that the children became so used to the blood and numb to the killing that some even started to enjoy it and would be unhappy if there wasn't as much blood being splattered.
He also told stories of how he saw a man being skinned alive in public, how soldiers ripped clothes off 3 men and threw them into boiling water, and how a son watched his father being tortured with acid as his skin started to peel off, leaving only his head intact until he died.
Violent attacks spread all throughout the country. Many of the new Red Army soldiers were the children who grew up watching the killings and torturing of others and enjoyed taking part in it themselves now.
They would beat anyone who resisted the party, and they wouldn't even stop at killing babies. They would brag that the best way to kill a baby would be stepping on one leg while holding onto the other, tearing the baby in half.
In fact, the CCP loves violence and bloodshed so much that the flag itself is a symbol of its thirst for blood. The CCP said that it has been dyed red with martyrs' blood, which is why some Chinese people call it the blood red flag.
Mao knew that the intellectuals of China would never accept his Communist Party and the bloody killing, so he called on all of them to come together and help the CCP rectify itself. The movement was also known as the 100 Flowers Movement.
See, on the surface, he called on them to have the great minds of China come together and freely speak their views in the name of freedom of thought and rectifying the CCP. What he was really doing is, quote, luring the snakes out of their holes, in which he wrote to his party chiefs.
What happened next was that Mao was calling for an anti-rightist movement where he branded all of the 540,000 of them as rightists and had the Red Army and even citizens take part in brutal beatings, arresting them, forcing them out of their homes, losing their jobs, and everything else to send a clear message that if you hold negative thoughts of the party, they will find you.
In the memoir, The Past Doesn't Disappear Like Smoke, there is a quote from Mao boasting about the killings in which he said, quote, "What can Emperor Qin Shi Huang brag about? He only killed 460 Confucian scholars, but we killed 46,000 intellectuals."
150 years in the making. The ultimate evil specter. Lies, hatred, and struggle. Traditions destroyed. The deep state's cult, communism.
The CCP became obsessed with violence so much that people who promoted any kind of violence were praised by the party. There's even something called the Guangxi cannibalism, where just normal citizens soon started to enjoy feasting on the bodies of their fellow Chinese race. According to the 9 commentaries,
in Wushuan County, like wild dogs eating corpses during an epidemic, people were madly eating other people. Often victims were first publicly criticized, which was always followed by killing, and then cannibalism. As soon as a victim fell to the ground, dead or alive, people took out the knives they had prepared and surrounded the victim, cutting any body part they could get a hold of. At this stage, ordinary citizens were all involved in the cannibalism.
Even more disgusting and demonic, if you can get any worse, was that people would drink alcohol and play games while they feast on human body parts, even at the highest level of government organizations. Cafeterias there would actually serve human dishes.
Now, of course, all of you are probably thinking the same thing. Why and how could this even be possible, and what was the purpose of doing this?
You have to understand that whether or not Mao was secretly a deep state pupil following the same path or becoming part of the Illuminati, as some people are saying, the purpose was actually to turn people into demons, so no God would ever accept them as humans anymore.
Again, just like Marx, Lenin, and the deep state, Mao knew what religions taught was real, and that Satan is real. It doesn't matter what we believe, they know this to be true. So they wish to destroy and ruin people so much that no divine being would even want to help them.
When people no longer believe in a righteous God, demons, rotten spirits, and all kinds of messed up stuff will consume them with the goal of dragging people down to hell. The Communist Party even created a song about it that party members still sing.
There has never been any savior of the world, nor deities, nor emperors on which to depend. To create humankind's happiness, we must entirely depend on ourselves.
And this goes on to our next topic, the destruction of religion. Because China had such a long and rich culture, there were many ancient temples, historic artifacts, statues, and so much more. Mao knew that in order to fully complete his revolution, he had to destroy all of this.
Before the Cultural Revolution, there were more than 500 temples and monasteries in Beijing, and almost every city in China had temples. Ancient walls or monasteries full of monks and religious people.
Mao sent his Red Army and incited the people that these were all old thoughts and ideas and they must be destroyed to pave the way for the new China. The people set out like a plague, destroying and killing anything related to ancient culture or religious clergymen or monks.
They would force Muslims to eat pork, monks to eat meat and get married, and Catholic priests to either be exiled, jailed, or killed. If anyone refused, they would parade them around the towns, sometimes without any clothes on, with signs that read, "To hell with the scriptures, they are full of shit."
Over 11,000 Catholics were killed, and even some foreign priests were killed or jailed, with over 3 million followers of these religions arrested or executed.
Then Mao created new organizations just as the deep state does, such as the Chinese Taoist Association, or the Chinese Buddhist Association, or Chinese Patriotic Catholic Association, and so on, with the agenda that each of these were being controlled by party leaders and not actual real religious people.
This serves multiple purposes. One is so that they can keep an eye on people. Two is so that they can start to undermine it from within, forcing people to lose their faith in these religions. Three is for the party's own financial gain, plus many more.
But no matter what faith you believed in, the party was always above any god or religion. If you pray at the dinner table, you must thank the party first before you have your food.
Today, there are religions in China, but they have to be approved by the party. Most of the teachings of Jesus has been removed from the Bible in China, which sparked an underground Christian movement, which is being heavily persecuted to this day.
Also, the spiritual practice Falun Gong also teaches that there are divine beings watching over us and that we must live by the universal principles of truth, compassion, and tolerance.
This goes against everything that the party stands for, such as lies, corruptions, and violence. So the party sees it as a threat to its very existence, since it's teaching people to be kind.
Sadly, this is still going on today, affecting so many people in China and ruining lives, families, and forcing people to leave the country with never being able to see their families again. Now, some of you might be thinking, how and why were all of these evil communist people able to do what they did in history and kill so many people and get away with it?
Well, even if you don't believe it, the deep state knows that Satan is real. They believe in it so much that they worship him. We believe that Satan sent his demon army here to destroy mankind, God, and to create hell on earth, dragging the people downward.
Mao was really the manifestation of a demon to carry out Satan's wishes, with the Chinese Communist Party being the root of all evil found in this world ever in history. And to give a total of the number of lives killed just by the CCP alone, it's 80 to 100 million. And that is just a very conservative estimate.
Never has a bloodthirsty regime killed as many people as the Chinese Communist Party. From our research, it seemed that the Illuminati used communism as its evil force to turn our world into chaos, with the goal being, when we finally reach the end times, people would stop believing in God and the divine.
This way, Satan and his Red Army would rule over the earth, and the deep state would be his servants, and the rest of us would become their slaves.
Yeah, whoever lived.
Yeah.
Now, whether you believe this or not is completely irrelevant. Deep State's goal was to kill off more than 70% of the population to form their one world government and their one religion, which is Satanism.
And atheism. But this isn't going to happen. Why? Because a divine force is stopping this, and people are waking up and seeing the light in the darkness. They were blindsided, and now they're in a panic because they're losing this war.
Also, a movement started in China after the persecution of Falun Gong started in 1999. Over 350 million Chinese people have now quit the Chinese Party or its affiliated organizations.
So the battle is not over yet, and it's still going on to this day. According to the Ep5, how the specter of communism is ruling our world, Satan wanted to make our world complete chaos. So when the Messiah actually arrives, people will be too lost and hateful to even want to be saved.
But as we said, things are changing, and a divine light is starting to shine through all of this. But China is doing some of the most hateful things on this planet, with its organ harvesting of living people, its one-child policy, and even a large underground ring of selling babies for cannibalism, which I am sure is connected to the deep state and a slew of other horrible things.
Now, you might not believe this is happening, but this is what communism has been doing to the Chinese people, turning them from the most spiritually and deeply developed and rooted people of faith on this planet to literally monsters that are capable of eating babies because they believe it will grant them everlasting youth. And of course, people, we are not talking about everyone in China. There are some really good people in China as well, and no one should be discriminating against them. They're living through this communist specter is an actual miracle.
You can't get more disgusting than this, but of course, this is just a small number of the Chinese people. But because of the Cultural Revolution, destruction of faiths, its promotion of cannibalism, and the lies which have brainwashed the Chinese people, it has turned the Chinese people against each other and forced them not to trust anyone.
It's called party culture. This has become so normal that most Chinese people don't know anything about what happened in their own history. Take, for example, the Tiananmen Square massacre. Most believed that the students opened fire on the military first, which gave them the right to fire back on the students. Of course, this is not at all what happened.
And of course, we're mostly just talking about the people still inside China, not the ones who came overseas and are able to see the truth.
Yeah.
So of course, we're not talking about all Chinese people. We're just talking about the ones still being brainwashed by the party itself who thinks it's good.
I mean, people in the US are brainwashed by our own media. You can imagine if the Communist Party is in charge.
That's true. But we'll go over all of this and more on the Chinese Communist Party persecutions in the last few decades in our next episode. We know this was one very intense episode. I mean, we were both tearing. I was tearing up when I was writing this, and when we were reading it, we were both hit. It hit us both really hard.
It's rough.
But the point of this was to really show how communism has destroyed our world and to have you guys learn the real history of the CCP and its origins of communism.
As hard as it is to watch, it's important that we understand the history, so to make sure it never gets this way again. And with that, we want to thank you guys for watching our series on communism. And don't forget, just like our Deep State series, our Communism series has laid the foundation for innumerable offshoot episodes. We're going to be covering things like Darwin, Saul Alinsky's real impact on the world, organ harvesting, the Khmer Rouge, and so much more.
That's right. It's going to shed light on the true history that's been hidden from us, but that we owe it to ourselves to know.
So hang on to your hats, Ben. And in the meantime,
we'll see you guys out
on the edge.